filthy cells, unimaginable torture, and sanctions that shatter the mind. Some of these prisons are so cruel that death seems like a relief. Get ready for a dark journey through the worst nightmares of the prison system. A scientific prisoner named Bellon has one of those stories that sound like they were taken from a movie, but tragically, it happened in real life. Bellon, known for his intelligence and strong character, was just one day away from gaining his freedom. One day, but everything came to a brutal halt. At 23 years old, Jan Tyler Rick, a fellow inmate, stabbed him to death inside Escambia County Jail. The question that echoes is, what drives a human being to commit such a monstrous act, especially in an environment already so suffocating and inhumane? Bellon was a victim of a system where survival is cruelly bargained for every single day. His death is not just a number or a statistic, but a reflection of the extreme conditions inside prisons like this. Sadly, he was not the first, and all signs point to the fact that he won't be the last. The silent hell, prisons that break the spirit. In different parts of the world, there are prisons that go far beyond the limits of conventional confinement. These places not only strip away freedom, but also drain the humanity from the inmates. Let's explore some of them. Number 1, Bang Kwang, where hell is just the beginning. Have you ever heard of prisons so brutal that the very idea of surviving there feels impossible? What if I told you that there is a place where fear, pain, and hopelessness are your constant companions from the moment you walk through the gates? Welcome to Bang Kwang Central Prison in Thailand, a place so notorious for its brutality that it earned the grim nickname Bangkok Hilton. But contrary to what the name might suggest, there's no glamour or luxury in this place, only extreme suffering, immeasurable pain, and a daily battle to stay alive. Now imagine that you are sentenced, and during the first 3 months, your feet are shackled with heavy iron chains. This isn't just a simple restriction of movement, it's a physical and psychological burden. The chains not only prevent you from walking freely, but also serve as a clear reminder that your freedom has been ripped away, possibly forever. The weight of the chains is a constant message. You are here to pay a high price, maybe even higher than you can imagine. This suffering isn't limited to physical pain. It's a torment that goes beyond the body, affecting the prisoners' minds and souls. Bang Kwang houses Thailand's most dangerous criminals, including those on death row. However, the true cruelty lies not only in the deaths that await, but in the way prisoners are treated while they await their fate. For these men, waiting for execution is a psychological torture far worse than death itself. They don't know when the execution will take place, nor can they prepare themselves for what's coming. The only information they receive is that their execution will happen within a 2-hour window. Yes, just 2 hours' notice. Imagine living for years under the constant pressure of not knowing if today will be the day your life ends. Fear, anguish, and uncertainty consume the minds of these men, creating a scenario where the psyche is destroyed long before the physical end arrives. But the terror doesn't stop there. Bang Kwang Prison is a true factory of suffering in every sense. Overcrowded with virtually non-existent sanitation and overrun with disease, survival here becomes a daily challenge. The space is cramped, and with hundreds of inmates living together in unsanitary conditions, infections spread rapidly. With food cruelly rationed, prisoners battle not only hunger, but also diseases that spread easily in the absence of medical care. The lack of resources and basic health assistance makes life even more unbearable, contributing to the physical and mental deterioration of inmates. With this picture of absolute despair, the question arises, how can anyone endure in a place designed to destroy both body and mind? Bang Kwang is not just a prison. It is a psychological battlefield, a place where the fight for survival is constant and where every day feels like endless torture. For the prisoners, hopes for a better future are virtually non-existent. The justice system, The prison structure, the living conditions, everything is designed to break them down, physically and psychologically. The resistance of the prisoners, therefore, is not merely a matter of physical strength, but of mental resilience that defies logic. Some manage to find ways to cope with the suffering, whether by building bonds with fellow inmates or creating small daily routines that, though insignificant in the grand scheme of things, offer some form of control over their situation. Others, however, succumb to the immense pressure and despair, disappearing into the darkness of their own minds. This place is a living nightmare, and at the same time, a terrifying demonstration of the human capacity to endure the seemingly unbearable. Bangkwang, far from being a normal prison, is an abyss of suffering where hell is not a metaphor. It is the daily reality of those inside. Number 2. Gitarama Central Prison. Hell on Earth. Gitarama, Rwanda. If you could imagine a place where human dignity has been completely erased, where every day is a desperate fight for survival, you would be starting to understand what Gitarama Prison is. Located in Rwanda, this prison is not just an example of a failed system, it is the cruelest portrait of what it means to live without hope, where every inmate's life is reduced to a constant struggle against pain, fear, and degradation. Originally designed to hold 500 inmates, Gitarama now holds over 7,000 people, turning what was supposed to be a detention center into a true human dungeon. But the word overcrowded doesn't even come close to describing the reality inside. Prisoners are not even granted the dignity of personal space. Many are forced to sleep standing up, packed against each other in indescribable conditions. Now try to imagine this, waking up every day in a place where there is no room to breathe, where the air is so dense and suffocating it's hard to even think. The floor, covered in a mix of filth, exhausted bodies, and the humiliation of overcrowding, can barely be seen. The unbearable heat mixes with the stench of rot and the palpable desperation in the air. In this scenario, pain is not just physical, it is psychological. Every breath is a reminder that you are trapped in an endless cycle of suffering. There is no salvation, there is no end. The lack of hygiene is devastating. In Gitarama, diseases like gangrene spread rapidly among inmates, making every day a battle against death. Imagine living with no access to medical care, being forced to endure unbearable pain, and even more terrifying, watching your open wounds slowly rot away day after day. The prisoners have no names or faces. In a place like Gitarama, human beings become numbers, condemned to live in misery until death, in its cruelest form, finally reaches them. The body falls apart, but the soul is consumed long before the end. And the pain is not only physical. The psychological impact of living in such an inhumane place corrodes the very essence of being human. Gitarama Prison is not just a place to serve a sentence. It is a psychological battlefield where survival annihilates any trace of humanity. The scarcity of food creates a constant war among prisoners. Fights over food and any available space occur daily, and the weakest, those who cannot assert themselves, are literally left to die. In this place, survival is not a fair fight, it is a bloodbath, where those who become vulnerable end up losing. Allow a place like Gitarama to become a reality for thousands of people. What is needed to transform a situation like this and restore humanity to those who have been consumed by it? These question walls. In San Pedro, survival doesn't depend on justice, but on influence, money, and power. And those without these currencies find themselves at the mercy of brutality and inequality. Within these walls, San Pedro resembles a small city more than a prison, with little or no chance of escaping the brutality. And what about the children living there? Children, yes, because in San Pedro, family system, the contrast between the apparent normalcy of families living together and the violence that become everyday norms. In San Pedro, survival is a degree of safety, some comfort, or at least the ability to breathe without fear. Those without live in a constant state of vulnerability, where the slightest mistake can result in violent, brutal punishment. The prison, which should be a place for punishment and rehabilitation, becomes a microcosm of an unequal society, where rules are created and enforced according to the power and interests of those who control the game. There is no justice, no regulations, and each prisoner's life is determined by their position within this cruel hierarchy. The big question that arises then is, how can something like this exist? How did we reach a point where a prison ceases to be a place of punishment and becomes a lawless city, where inequality is amplified and chaos is the only constant? How is it possible that in the 21st century, such a failed and inhumane system can still be allowed, without anyone questioning what is being done to the lives of thousands of people condemned to live in this nightmare? San Pedro is not just a prison. It is a distorted reflection of society as a whole, a place where the absence of law and the dominance of financial power create a reality in which each person's survival depends on their ability to manipulate, to pay, and to control. What happens there is a horrifying metaphor for the inequalities that exist outside those walls, but within them, the consequences are more cruel, more immediate, and more visible. What should be a place of justice and rehabilitation has become a dark reflection of a society that has failed to offer dignity and respect to all. Number 4. Petak Island. Prison, a soul-breaking isolation. In the freezing waters of White Lake, Russia, there exists a place that redefines the concept of solitude and despair. Petak Island Prison is not simply a high-security facility. It is a fortress of extreme isolation, where inmates are forced to live a silent and unending nightmare, with no hope of escape or relief. Located on a remote island and surrounded by icy waters that freeze solid in winter, Petak is a terrifying example of how the penal system can be used to inflict the cruelest form of punishment: absolute isolation. In this place, it's not just the body that is punished, but the soul and sanity of the prisoners that are systematically destroyed. The feeling of being completely disconnected from the outside world, in a place where one's only company is silence itself, makes Petak one of the worst nightmares of the Russian prison system. Far from everything and everyone, surrounded by deadly waters, Petak's prisoners spend their days confined in tiny, filthy cells with no meaningful human contact. The isolation is total and relentless. There is no one to talk to, no sound from other inmates, no form of social interaction whatsoever. There is not even a glimpse of life. Only the oppressive sound of the cold wind and the echo of their own thoughts, which become a constant presence in each prisoner's mind, day after day. Every minute in Petak is an eternity in which inmates are forced to confront the ghosts of solitude, guilt, and despair. The absence of any external stimulus makes the experience even more overwhelming, and many find themselves lost in a maze of thoughts that only weakens them more with each passing hour. The isolated environment offers no possibility of escape. There is no hope, no comfort, only the crushing emptiness of silence. The cold, so characteristic of the place, is more than just a climate condition. It is a constant member of the prisoners' daily lives, an unrelenting presence that punishes both body and mind without end. The extreme temperatures don't just affect the physical, they begin to erode the inmates' mental capacities as well. The freezing environment, combined with inescapable solitude, slowly destroys whatever psychological resilience a prisoner might have had. With no stimuli, no social interaction, no human warmth to offer any kind of comfort, the inmate finds himself immersed in a spiral of despair, where the cold is not only a tangible element, but a reflection of his emotional condition. Over time, many begin to lose their perception of time, of reality, and of themselves. The extreme isolation is a form of psychological torture that slowly eats away at sanity, dragging prisoners into deep states of hopelessness, where the mind begins to unravel. And the cruelest part of it all is that this torture leaves no visible scars. It works from within, slowly, until the prisoner no longer knows who he is. This prison doesn't need physical torture to be brutal. Its true cruelty lies in silence and solitude. Its greatest weapon is the total absence of human interaction, a punishment that leaves no marks on the body but shatters the spirit irreparably. For many, isolation in Petak is considered worse than death itself. The idea of living in a perpetual state of disconnection, with no contact with the outside world, no human comfort, is more than most can endure. Absolute solitude leaves marks that go beyond the physical. It affects the psyche in ways that are difficult to comprehend. For those sent to Petak, the sentence is not just one of physical suffering, but of complete loss of any connection to humanity. Every day there is a battle to maintain sanity, and for many, that battle is lost. Even for Russia's most dangerous criminals, the fate of being sent to Petak Island prison is an unbearable psychological sentence. Every inmate who arrives there knows that the world beyond the island is unreachable, and the future, for them, is as cold and empty as the waters that surround them. The impossibility of escape, the total lack of prospects, and the complete disconnection from civilized society make the experience at Petak a form of punishment that goes far beyond what one might call imprisonment. It is not merely about serving a sentence. It is about the disintegration of the person as a human being, a punishment that destroys identity and the will to live. The isolation, combined with the overwhelming sense of abandonment and hopelessness, turns Petak into a true dungeon, where psychological death comes long before the physical one. And for those who live there, the real punishment is not the prison sentence. It is the fact that they are condemned to an existence that will never be the same again. The big question that remains is, how can a place like Petak Island exist? How is it possible that a country's justice system allows a human being to be subjected to such an extreme and inhumane form of punishment? Prison is not just a way to punish those who commit crimes, but also an opportunity for rehabilitation and social reintegration. But in Petak, that possibility is completely erased. What is seen there is not a prison aimed at reform, but a place designed for destruction, for the disintegration of the individual, where the only fate for prisoners is the abyss of solitude. These conditions raise profound questions about the limits of punishment and about how far a society can go in justifying such methods, regardless of the severity of the crimes committed. What is being done there goes beyond punishment. It is an assault on human dignity itself. What do you think about prisons like Petak Island? Are they necessary to contain the most dangerous criminals, or do they represent a form of inhumane punishment that should be re-evaluated? What is more important, ensuring the safety of society or preserving human dignity, even for those who have committed the most heinous crimes? Number 5. Tadmor Prison, the slaughterhouse of humanity. If there is a place where terror was not only imposed but institutionalized, it is Tadmor Prison in Syria. Darkly known as the Slaughterhouse, this facility carries a history of cruelty that seems ripped from a nightmare so far removed from reality that it becomes difficult to comprehend. Tadmor was not just a prison. It was a site of psychological and physical extermination, where the basic rules of human dignity were systematically erased. Under various authoritarian regimes, human cruelty in Tadmor reached unimaginable levels, and what was supposed to be an institution for incarcerating criminals became a space dedicated to the destruction of the human essence. There, Prisoners not only lost their freedom, but in many cases also their identity, their spirit, and tragically, their humanity. There was no hint of hope, only the promise of endless suffering, a continuous cycle of pain that stretched on for years. Located deep in the Syrian desert, Tadmor was not just a maximum security prison, it was a kind of hell on earth, a stage for mass executions, brutal torture, and relentless repression. The function of Tadmor was not simply to confine prisoners, but to physically and psychologically destroy those sent there. Accounts from former prisoners who lived through that place are horrifying, describing an environment where cruelty seemed to be the only law. The main purpose of this prison, under the regime that operated it, was not merely to deprive prisoners of their freedom, but to dehumanize them so absolutely that their lives became irrelevant. There was no chance of a better future, no mercy for those imprisoned there, and the words justice and human rights were nothing more than distant echoes. In Tadmor, the only thing prisoners could expect was more suffering, more humiliation, and an existence marked by unending violence. The methods of punishment applied in Tadmor were so extreme that even the prison walls seemed to absorb the screams of pain from those who suffered there. Survivor testimonies tell of scenes of brutality that defy human comprehension. Relentless beatings, starvation, and torture methods so elaborate and cruel that their sole purpose was to break both the body and the soul. In Tadmor, the body was not just a prison for the mind, it was a constant target of physical torment. Prisoners were subjected to such violent punishment that their bodies became unrecognizable, while their minds, constantly tormented, began to collapse. The torture methods were designed not just to inflict pain, but to destroy any remaining trace of psychological resistance. What happened in Tadmor was a form of human extermination, where suffering became such a central part of the experience that many prisoners lost the ability to distinguish between physical and emotional pain. Each day, there was a torment, a battle for survival in a place where every trace of humanity was cruelly erased. For many, Tadmor was not just a place of physical punishment, but a sentence of slow, painful death, a fate where hope died before the body. The psychological torture was so intense that many prisoners did not even survive the emotional pain. Those who managed to endure and survive physically carried deep and indelible scars that mark both their bodies and souls forever. The physical scars, the result of torture, are only the visible part of the pain. The emotional scars run even deeper and are impossible to erase. For these people, life was never the same after what they experienced in Tadmor. Survivor accounts often speak of an irreversible transformation, where the trauma lived in that prison left a permanent mark on their identities. The experiences of suffering they endured in Tadmor became a burden for the rest of their lives, and what was done to them in that place became part of who they are. Their stories, full of horror and pain, serve as a grim reminder of humanity's capacity to inflict suffering when power is placed above any principle of compassion and dignity. Even after the regime changes that occurred in Syria, Tadmor's dark legacy remains. The name Tadmor is now synonymous with repression, cruelty, and the deepest human suffering. It remains a painful symbol of how a political system can transform a place meant for incarceration into one of total oppression, where any form of humanity is systematically stripped away. The echo of the torture and executions that occurred there still reverberates, reminding the world that when absolute power is exercised without any form of control or accountability, it can turn human beings into monsters. Tadmor was not just a physical place. It represents the darkest aspects of human history. It is a reminder that the pursuit of power, when stripped of compassion or ethics, can create systems of oppression so cruel that those who experience them become unrecognizable, not only to others, but even to themselves. Tadmor is, without a doubt, a monument to human suffering, a symbol of the consequences of a total lack of humanity within a governing system. It is a terrifying warning that the line between authority and tyranny can disappear quickly when absolute power is allowed to grow without limits. Number 6. The Carandiru Nightmare, an open wound in Brazil's history. When we talk about Carandiru, we are addressing one of the darkest and most traumatic chapters in Brazilian history, a place where the structural failures of the Brazilian prison system became brutally and inescapably visible to the world. The Carandiru Penitentiary Complex, located in the heart of São Paulo, was not just a prison, but a stark reflection of a broken and failed carceral system where human dignity was consistently denied and the living conditions of inmates were inhumane. More than just a place of confinement, Carandiru became a portrait of abandonment and despair, a site where the promises of rehabilitation and justice seemed no more than a distant and unattainable ideal. Inside its walls, prisoners were treated as numbers, stripped of their most basic rights, and forced to live in a state of constant deprivation and violence. The cruel reality faced by thousands within Carandiru became a symbol of the failure of the nation's prison system, which was unable to guarantee any form of dignity or fair treatment for those who were confined within it. Carandiru made history in a tragic and irreversible way in 1992, when a riot started by inmates demanding better living conditions turned into a massacre. What began as a cry for help, a desperate attempt to make the world see the unbearable conditions inside the prison, quickly became a bloodbath. More than 100 inmates were brutally killed that day, many of them without trial, without defense, and without any chance of survival. The police response, marked by extreme violence and unrestrained brutality, was a clear reflection of a state that treated its own citizens with total disdain. The 1992 tragedy not only exposed the failures of the prison system, but also revealed the cruelty of a system that, instead of seeking rehabilitation, simply eliminated those who didn't fit its mold. Carandiru became an international symbol of repression, inhumanity, and state failure, a place where human life held no value and justice seemed like a distant illusion. Within its filthy and overcrowded walls, Carandiru's prisoners lived in desolate and unacceptable conditions. Overcrowding was the norm, with cells crammed full of people, lacking even enough space for inmates to move with any degree of freedom. Hunger was constant, disease spread rapidly, and the constant threat of violence made every day a battle for survival. Carandiru was not merely a prison, it was a daily battlefield where the rules were dictated by the criminal factions that dominated the environment. In such a place, human life seemed worth less than nothing, and the only way to survive was to submit to the unofficial laws imposed by the gangs that controlled the prison. Violence was not an isolated occurrence, but a constant presence in all aspects of life within the complex. Those who couldn't adapt to the brutal rules of the internal system were quickly eliminated, either by gang violence or by the neglect of the authorities. Inequality was glaring, and the weakest were forced to fight for their dignity in an environment where law was simply absent. The 1992 massacre at Carandiru exposed to the world what many already knew but few dared to admit. The Brazilian prison system was in collapse. The images of piled bodies and cells overtaken by chaos and horror were broadcast globally, and those images became etched into the collective memory not only of Brazil, but of people in other countries who watched in disbelief at what had occurred. Carandiru, in its darkest moment, became a symbol of a failed system that not only failed to fulfill its function of rehabilitating, but instead became a place of extreme suffering where human rights were completely disregarded. The 1992 tragedy was the breaking point that dramatically demonstrated how unsustainable life in the Brazilian prison system had become. For many, Carandiru represented the total collapse of a system that should have worked to correct behavior and offer prisoners a chance at reintegration, but instead perpetuated violence, inequality, and dehumanization. Although Carandiru was demolished after its deactivation, as if the physical destruction of its walls could erase the suffering and pain that took place there, its legacy remains. What happened within its walls cannot be erased, and the memory of the violence that occurred in that place continues to haunt Brazilian history. The destruction of the complex did not erase the scars it left on Brazilian society. Carandiru is not merely a place where isolated tragedies occurred, but a reflection of a system that for far too long ignored the inhumane conditions it imposed on thousands of people, treating them as if they were undeserving of compassion, respect, or justice. Carandiru deeply and painfully symbolizes what happens when the state fails to provide any form of protection and rights to its most vulnerable citizens. It is a permanent reminder that when the justice system fails, society pays a steep price, not only in human lives, but in dignity, respect, and humanity. Carandiru is a call for reflection, an opportunity for all of us to think about what happened and what is still happening in our prison system. Have we truly learned from this dark chapter of our history, or are we doomed to repeat the same mistakes, ignoring the lives of thousands of people who continue to be left behind, forgotten and invisible in prisons that destroy rather than correct? The question is, can we truly reform the prison system to prevent tragedies like Carandiru? And if so, what needs to change so that the lives of inmates are valued and their conditions for rehabilitation become a real priority? These are questions that demand urgent answers so we don't fall again into the same errors of the past. Carandiru's legacy challenges us to act, to fight for a system that does not destroy, but that offers real chances of transformation. After all, in a country that seeks justice, rehabilitation cannot be optional. It must be the norm. Now, this is where we close with maximum impact. Have you ever stopped to think about what really happens inside that prison? What life is like for someone who is incarcerated there, often without having even been convicted? What if I told you that one of the most infamous prisons in the world, Rikers Island, is a true labyrinth of suffering and injustice? In this video, we're going to explore the depths of this prison and the stories it holds. Get ready for an emotional and eye-opening journey that not only sheds light on the reality of inmates, but also makes us question what justice really means in our society. Throughout this video, we will dive into powerful testimonies, alarming statistics, and deep reflections on a system that, in many ways, fails to fulfill its role of rehabilitation and justice. So stay with us, because what you're about to discover may change the way you see the prison system and the fight for dignity and human rights. Rikers Island, located in New York, is a place that many know by name, but few understand the reality of what goes on inside. With a reputation for overcrowding, violence, and inhumane conditions, this prison has become a symbol of a system that fails to deliver justice. Did you know that many of the inmates are there just waiting for their trials? That's right. They haven't been convicted, yet they still face treatment that many would consider unacceptable. Imagine the anguish of spending months or even years in a cell, not knowing whether you'll be found guilty or innocent. That uncertainty is one of the many injustices that permeate life at Rikers. The prison is not just a place of punishment. It's a space where human dignity is often ignored, and hope is crushed under the weight of a system that seems more interested in punishment than rehabilitation. Life at Rikers is marked by a sense of despair and powerlessness, where many inmates feel as if they are stuck in limbo with no idea what the future holds. The living conditions at Rikers are alarming and, in many cases, inhumane. Imagine living in a cramped space with no privacy, surrounded by people who are just as desperate as you. Overcrowding is a daily reality, and it creates tensions that can erupt into violence. Reports of assaults, both between inmates and by guards, are common. It's a vicious cycle that perpetuates suffering and pain. The lack of space and adequate resources turns the prison into a true battleground where survival becomes the priority. Inmates often find themselves having to fight for food, space, and even respect. This constant struggle not only affects individuals' mental health, but also creates an environment where violence becomes the norm rather than the exception. What does this tell us about the nature of the penal system? Are we truly creating a space that promotes rehabilitation, or are we just feeding a cycle of violence and despair? Overcrowding at Rikers is not just a matter of physical space, it's a matter of human dignity. Every inmate is a person with a story, and those stories are often forgotten amidst the chaos. And what can we say about the treatment of inmates? Many face long periods of isolation, which can lead to serious mental health issues. The lack of social interaction and sensory deprivation are just some of the consequences of this system. Furthermore, access to medical care is often inadequate, leaving many without the assistance they need. Imagine being sick and having no one to care for you, or worse, being ignored by those who are supposed to look after your health. Medical neglect at Rikers is a critical issue that cannot be ignored. Many inmates report that their health conditions are treated with indifference, which not only worsens their situations, but also raises ethical concerns about the penal system's responsibility to care for its inmates. What happens when the mental and physical health of inmates is pushed aside? Are we truly creating a system that seeks justice, or are we merely perpetuating pain and suffering? The lack of resources and the dehumanization of inmates are issues that urgently need to be addressed. Mental health is often a neglected aspect, and many inmates leave Rikers in far worse condition than when they entered. But why does this happen? The truth is that Rikers Island is a reflection of broader inequalities in society. Most inmates come from marginalized communities, and this raises questions about justice and equity. The penal system often fails to rehabilitate. Instead, it perpetuates cycles of violence and poverty. Prison becomes a place where hopes are crushed and lives are destroyed. The intersectionality of poverty, race, and social class plays a crucial role in how people are treated within the system. Those from disadvantaged communities face additional barriers that hinder their ability to defend themselves and are often more likely to receive harsh sentences. This leads us to question: how can we allow such an unequal system to continue operating? What can we do to ensure that everyone has access to fair and humane treatment regardless of their legal status? The fight for justice should not only be a matter of policy, it must be a matter of human rights. We need to come together to demand changes that ensure everyone, regardless of their background, is treated with dignity and respect. In recent years, reform movements have gained momentum, calling for the closure of Rikers and the creation of more humane facilities. In 2019, the city government announced plans to close the prison, but implementing these plans has faced many challenges. The fight for justice and dignity continues, and it is essential that all of us are aware of what is happening. Pressure from civil society and human rights organizations is crucial for real change to occur. However, the struggle is not easy. There are many interests at play, and resistance to change is strong. We must unite and demand a system that not only punishes, but also rehabilitates and offers a second chance. What can we do as a society to support these reforms? How can we ensure that the voices of inmates are heard and that their stories are told? Change begins with awareness and education. We need to talk about these issues, share information, and mobilize the community so that everyone can understand the gravity of the situation. One aspect often overlooked in the discussion about Rikers is the impact the prison has on the families of inmates. When a family member is incarcerated, the consequences go far beyond the individual. Families face financial, emotional, and social hardships. Often, the children of inmates grow up without the presence of a parent, which can lead to behavioral problems, academic struggles, and a cycle of poverty that continues. Additionally, the stigma associated with incarceration can isolate these families, making it even harder for them to access resources and support. It is essential that society recognizes that incarceration does not only affect the individual, but also their families and communities. We need policies that consider the well-being of families and offer support during and after incarceration. Rehabilitation must include not only the inmate, but also the reintegration of their families into society. Now I want to hear from you. What do you think should be done to improve prison conditions? Do you believe the system can be reformed? Leave your opinions in the comments. Your voice is important and can make a difference. The discussion about the prison system is vital, and each of us can contribute to a fairer future. It is essential that we continue to talk about these issues and push for change. Awareness is the first step toward transformation, and each of us has a role to play. By sharing your ideas and experiences, you can inspire others to get involved and fight for a more just and humane system. Moreover, it's important to remember that the situation at Rikers is not an isolated case. Many prisons around the world face similar problems, and the fight for reform is a global battle. We need to look at the system as a whole and ask, how can we ensure that everyone has access to fair and humane treatment, regardless of their legal status? The fight for justice should not be limited to one place. It must be a cause we all stand for. Solidarity among communities and collaboration between organizations are essential to create a strong and effective movement that can challenge the status quo and demand meaningful change. Stay with us, because we have much more to come. In upcoming videos, we will explore other aspects of the prison system and how it affects society. We will discuss the stories of people who have been through Rikers and how their lives were impacted. Don't miss it. And before we end, I want to leave you with a reflection. What does justice truly mean to you? How can we work together to create a system that not only punishes, but also rehabilitates and offers a second chance? Leave your answers in the comments, and let's keep this important conversation going. If you're enjoying this content, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Your participation is essential so we can continue bringing meaningful content. And of course, share this video with your friends and family. Let's spread the message and make a difference together. Stay tuned for the next videos on our channel. There's much more to discuss and explore, and your presence is always welcome. We have more videos right here on your screen.